Thank you all very much for joining us for this meeting on transforming food systems for health, equity, and sustainability. As I mentioned at the beginning, for those of you who are just joining, please keep your microphone on mute unless you have been given the floor to speak. Please name yourself as country and then your first name and last name. And to do that, in the tile that you're looking at, there's 3 little dots. If you click on it, and you will see an option to rename. You do need to select, if you're on a laptop, wherever the controls are on your computer. On a laptop, they're in the bottom right-hand corner. You will have a button for interpretation. It looks like a little world, and you can choose English, French, or Spanish for this meeting. We will have 3 opportunities to ask questions or make a comment on the presentations. One will be after a description of the UN Food Systems Summit. The second will be an intervention on climate change and food systems, or the third is on interventions on malnutrition and food systems. And with that, I will open the first session. The objectives of this meeting is to make sure that we help provide a parliamentary contribution in preparation to the United Nations Food Systems Summit that's being convened by the UN Secretary General in September. We don't have the exact date yet, but it's during the high-level week, so around the 21st. We want to discuss today how parliaments can engage on food systems and identify entry points for action to ensure that the production, processing, distribution, and consumption of food responds to health, equity, and sustainability imperatives. The UN Food Systems Summit is a call to action to transform the way we produce, consume, and think about food, to make progress on all the Sustainable Development Goals. Beyond the summit itself, it's an opportunity to build a movement, bringing together all the stakeholders. And key leadership on this UN Food Summit is provided by Ms. Agnès Kalibata. And so I will turn to the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the 2021 UN Food Summit to make her remarks after I welcome Martin Chungong, our Secretary General, to bring opening remarks. Martin.
Thank you very much, Patty. Thank you for that introduction. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this meeting. Your Excellency, the United Nations Secretary General Special Envoy to the 2021 UN Food Systems Summit, distinguished colleague, Chief Economist of the FAO, ladies and gentlemen, of course, distinguished members of Parliament present at this meeting. Indeed, I am pleased to be here to open this very important parliamentary meeting that, as my colleague Paddy has just said, is being held in the context of the United Nations Food Systems Summit. As Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union and a member of the lead group of the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, the topics that you are going to discuss today are very close to my heart. Food systems are not only central to our economies, but have a great impact on the lives of each and every one. What we eat determines our health and well-being, our ability to work and contribute to our communities. But how that food is produced and distributed also determines what impact we are having on the environment and how economies are distributed among, or resources are distributed among groups and segments of societies, and ultimately, if we will be able to achieve any development target in our countries. And let me already tell you that what you will hear today is not promising. You'll hear that food systems are not providing healthy food to our citizens, that consumers are not in a position to make the best choices about food, that our food systems are not sustainable, that they do not give equal access to livelihoods to all. But you'll also hear how you as parliamentarians can make a difference, because it is through legislation that you can protect the right to food and make it a reality through more equitable and sustainable food production. Despite the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the budgetary challenges it has brought about, it is precisely by investing in food systems that we can build a more resilient and prosperous future. And it's up to you, representatives of the people, to give a voice to the mothers whose poor nutrition is affecting their children's health, to the smallholder farmers, excuse me, indigenous peoples, and other groups who are still unable to access assets and services, to all men and women who cannot afford healthy diets and are faced with the consequences of undernutrition or obesity, and to the future generations who might not be able to benefit from the kind of environment, natural resources, biodiversity that would ensure them the future they want. The United Nations Food Systems Summit wants to bring answers to these challenges. The IPU is pleased to provide a platform to bring a parliamentary contribution to the summit and to pave the way for follow-up action at the country level. With the FAO, the Sun Movement, and other partners, we have also published a handbook to provide practical guidance to parliamentarians to prioritize nutrition. This meeting is therefore part of a process, a larger movement to transform food systems, which will only succeed if parliamentarians are in the driving seat. And to conclude, I would like to thank my dear sister, Agnes Kalibata, for leading this Food Systems Summit movement. I also want to recognize the contribution of my colleague, the UN Assistant Secretary General and lead of the Sun Movement, Gerda Verbeek, for the strong leadership they have shown. Of course, our partners at the FAO are very valued, and we hope that together we can forge a parliamentary perspective to this food summit, which is of utmost importance to us all in the context also of the SDGs. So thank you very much for being here, and we look forward to your deliberations, and of course, we look forward to following up. Thank you very much. Over to you, Patty.
Thank you so much, Martin. I'll now invite, as the Secretary General said, Ms. Agnes Kalibata, who is the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the UN Food Summit. And I'll also, while she's speaking, let you know you can listen to this meeting in English, French, or Spanish by choosing the interpretation button on your computer. And over to you, Ms. Kalibata.
Thank you, Paddy, and thank you. Let me start really by thanking and appreciating the invitation from His Excellency the Secretary General to be part of this meeting, and the invitation prior to be part of the meeting on COVID that we had, overcoming COVID and building back better. Let me also express my appreciation for the support that we continue to get from the Rome-based agencies, FAO, IFAD, and World Food Programme, and the support we get from Sun Movement. But most importantly, let me say that this summit and the processes that have gone on so far would not have been possible without the support of member states. I want to appreciate that your countries have contributed to the success that the summit is having. I also want to appreciate in advance the engagement of parliamentarians, appreciating fully well that a lot of the work that we are doing in this summit, its success is going to depend on the type of policy frameworks and policies that get designed to move forward the Food System Summit, and that won't be able to happen without the support of parliamentarians and how much they understand what is at stake. So this is really meant to give you an update. I'm going to give you an update of how far we've gone with the summit and what is at stake, and give you a chance then to ask me any questions you might have. So I have a presentation in PowerPoint, and I'll need the next slide, please. So the Food System Summit connects to all 17 SDGs. And when you look at how our food system works, some people call it a problem, other people look at it from a solutions perspective. I'm one of those people that look at it from a solutions perspective. But from a problem perspective, we see that the food system that we have today is not serving the key things we wanted food system to deliver against. We still have close to 700 million people that are hungry. We still have a huge number of people that suffering from diet-related diseases, almost 2 billion. We still have a huge number of people that are malnourished. We have a lot of waste that comes from food system, and we are contributing to climate change and biodiversity loss. So I think the biggest revelation in this food system today, not that we didn't know, but the thing that we need to come to terms with is that we are probably the #3 contributor to climate change. Yet climate change is impacting food systems the most. So we really, if we need to move forward with a food system that is functional for most people, we need to start addressing some of the impact it has on our environment. So next slide. So the Secretary General then launched the Food System Summit, recognizing the solutions part that I talked about, where there's significant scientific consensus that transforming food system is part of the solution, it provides the single strongest solution and opportunity to really deal with the problem of building back better, but also then really drawing on bold new action, innovations, and strategies that could really start anchoring and putting us on a path back to 2030. So really using the opportunity to look at how the decade of action might be the opportunity where we get to be as ambitious as we can to be able to deliver on the 2030 agenda. So his vision was that if we look at the solutions that the food system could offer and the opportunities that are in there, we might just use the decade of action to get back on track, but we'd have to be extremely ambitious. And I'm going to talk about some of that. Next slide. So with this slide, this is just to give you a sense of some of the things that we consider to be outcomes of the summit. The summit is coming to that place because 26th to 28th of July, we will have the pre-summit, and then the summit will be in September. One of the outcomes of the summit, and again, starting with the pre-summit, will be a statement by the Secretary General that provides the guiding narrative of how we go forward with food systems. So that will be a critical piece of the Food System Summit. The other part will be member states, which are now engaged in dialogues. Over 134 member states are now engaged in dialogues. We'll come up with strategies and policies, and we are calling these national pathways. These national pathways will define how we go forward from a food systems perspective. These dialogues have been happening, and what we'll be seeing by the time of the pre-summit is a few of them will step forward and really talk about how they would like to transform their food system with a very good understanding of what needs to be done. He also requests that we look at action and bold new action that might help us transform the food system. And action is in a number of ways. Action is the type of solutions that can be associated with some of the challenges that we see in the food system that can help countries resolve some of those challenges. But action can also in terms of the type of partnerships we create to come through together. That is also another form of action, and again, we'll see some of that. But action can also be individual. For example, you and I eat 3 times a day, and each of those times impact our food system. So what the decisions we take every time impact our food system, and our communities, the decisions they take impact our food system. So part of that then meant that we really reach out big time. We reach out to people, and we called this a People's Summit to help mobilize as many people as possible, to help engage as many people as possible, to in fact reach some form of, create some form of food system effect that will allow us to really start moving forward on changing our food system by reaching as many people as we can. He also requested that we create a system of review that will help us, or we make provisions for a system of review that will ensure that there's follow-up up to 2030 that can track action and progress. Next slide. I mentioned that there are over 134 countries now that are taking dialogues, and you can see how many countries across different continents. These countries are engaged in search for their national pathways from a food system perspective, because again, it's not about hunger, it's not about nutrition alone, it's not about issues of obesity, it's not about environment alone, it's about food systems. And food systems involves a number of sectors. And the dialogues is about how these sectors come together to talk about what they need to move together from a food system perspective, and how they would work together. So we have also a number of regional dialogues that are taking place in different continents to really help bring out the character of each region. The national dialogues recognize the locality of food systems and really will be anchored in the local context of each country. We also have then global dialogues that help us link to existing conversations and summits. For example, we are very closely linked to the Ocean Summit, recognizing fully well the blue economy that we need to be talking about here, but also are we linked to the Nutrition for Growth Summit that is happening in Japan next year, and several other summits that are going on. Next slide. So I talked about dialogues, but I also wanted to mention that in addition to dialogues, the area for action, I talked about how the Secretary General called for bold action for us to be able to deliver. So we created 5 action tracks or 5 action areas. And in those 5 action tracks, we laid out a massive process of collecting ideas and really trying to understand what type of solutions exist for our current challenges and problems. And we've mobilized over 2,500 ideas. So through that process. So here we are trying to give you a sense of what different groups are coming up with as what they see as most critical, so that we can come up with areas that speak to all of us. What are dialogues most concerned about? What are action tracks most hearing as what people are most concerned about? What are independent dialogues? We also do have independent dialogues, meaning constituencies like farmers meet as dialogues, private sector meet as dialogues. What are they concerned about? But also what's the science saying around what we need to be moving forward. And in that, we pull out areas which we are calling areas of convergence, or areas that really are critical. And those areas of convergence, we are pulled into the center circle, which is the red circle. And you can see that we are also making a connection to the SDGs, because remember, our job really is to make sure that we start providing an opportunity for us to come through SDGs. So the areas at the center really speak to some of the areas that came out the most frequently: nourishing people, dealing with climate change and biodiversity, livelihoods and well-being, improving livelihoods and well-being, empowering communities, resilience, and knowledge and innovation are some of the areas that nearly everybody agreed to as most critical. Next slide. Next slide, please. So we will use all this information. Then remember the first point I talked about, the Secretary General's statement. So we use those areas that I talked about as areas of convergence to really shape the Secretary General's statement as his call to action. But as we're doing the call to action, we realized that there are a number of things that people wanted really underscored. As yes, they will not be a call to action, but we have to anchor our call to action in those areas. And these are outlined here. Number one, of course, being reaffirming our 2030 agenda. Underscoring, number two, being underscoring the urgency, especially given COVID-19. Number two, the need to stay in planetary boundaries. Number three, sorry. Number four, the imperative to realize basic human rights as very critical to achieving SDGs and very critical to us coming through the pace at which we come through on SDGs. Number five, the emphasizing the urgency of moving beyond incremental action and really thinking through what we can do differently in the next 10 years. And then, of course, and very, very important, realizing the true cost of food. We have come to estimate that there's a hidden cost of food of about 12 trillion, that if we accounted for, if we started accounting for, would help us address many of the challenges we're talking about. In each of the areas of convergence that I talked to you about, which you can see underlined there, we will provide targets. The Secretary General's statement will show targets around how we come through these areas. And of course, we will define the type of action that should be put under these areas based on some of the other outcomes I indicated to you. Next slide. Excuse me. We are beginning to see, like I said earlier, we are beginning to see lots of solutions that can help us accelerate action to 2030 agenda. We have collected over 2,500, which we have grouped into 52 solution clusters. Now, 52 solution clusters, it means that, for example, if I'm looking to end hunger, there are a number of ways I can look at ending hunger, and there are a number of solutions that in those solution clusters. Ending hunger. And that's the same for all the areas that I talked about. So our solution clusters are grouped based on the area of interest. So if we are interested in dealing with climate change and biodiversity and staying within planetary boundaries, there are solution clusters that can help you address that question. So this is information that is going to be available as annexes to the Secretary General's statement, and anybody anywhere in the world can use this information to help them design their pathways, but also to help them deal with some of the challenges they're dealing with. Next slide. So how do we bring all this home? We've laid out a whole process, huge process, especially around the dialogue, ensuring that dialogues are happening, but also around action tracks, ensuring that we gather as much information as possible. We are in the process of bringing it home, narrowing it down to July 26th, which is the pre-summit, in which we hope that by the time of the pre-summit, we will have clarity around solutions that are being delivered, right? And these solutions, let me say it differently. Number one, we'll have clarity around national pathways and how they get delivered. So national pathways is the work that is coming out of country level dialogues. So that's number one. Those are your strategies for dealing with food system challenges. Number two, excuse me, there will be a number of partnerships that will be formed to support either existing partnerships, strengthen existing partnerships, or new partnerships to help countries come through on some of the challenges they can't come through alone. There will be, we will design or strengthen existing mechanisms of follow-up, mostly strengthening existing mechanisms of follow-up, and we can talk about that later, and that will also be discussed at the pre-summit.
Terrific.
Moving to the summit, really the summit is looking to ensure that the Secretary General has an opportunity to bring out his statement of action, to ensure that a few more coalitions are launched, to ensure that countries make their commitments through their national pathways, and to ensure that the larger community, there are lots of pledges that are coming from the larger community, youth, private sector, and all that, they have an opportunity also to make their pledges. Next slide, and I'm nearly done. Next slide.
Thank you.
We will have in 26 to 28, we will have a hybrid summit, which would allow us to be physically in Rome, maybe about 500 people or less. but also will allow so many other people to tap into through virtual systems. Next slide. So we are looking to ensure that the Food System Summit really delivers the biggest deliveries around delivering national pathways that can help us deliver against SDGs. So the journey is from the Food System Summit, national pathways, a few coalitions or partnerships, and SDGs. Next slide. So I want to spend just 1 minute to talk about the role of parliamentarians and how I see it and how you can help us. First of all, there's a whole lot of opportunities for you to engage in these dialogues and be interested and find out what your countries are putting forward. Are they providing a systemic approach to food systems so that we can actually revolutionize how we think and how transformation of food systems will happen? Just being interested and seeing what is happening would be important. Encourage governments to engage and participate in the July pre-summit and summit, and then really ensure that we are focusing on addressing the challenges of inequities in our food systems across all countries, because we've seen that all countries have exactly that problem, especially after COVID. And then really leveraging your ability to ensure that policies are built and formed, that frameworks are put in place, but also that investments happen. Once these policies are put in place, that investments to support those happen so that action can be taken and we can deliver on results. So we are counting on you as parliamentarians. Once this whole food system summit is done and different pathways are put in place or strategies are put in place, that actually we can advance it with national level policy frameworks that will allow us to engage and national level investments that will allow action to take place at country level. So I thank you all. I hope that we can use this opportunity to drive transformation towards the 2030 agenda, again, because we are behind in a number of areas, and this is impacting real people in real time. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kalibata. We will now turn to the next speaker who has been asked to speak for about 8 minutes. Anything you can shave off that time will be very helpful. If people have questions or comments, I encourage you to put them in the chat so we can make up a little bit. I will now ask from the FAO, Maximo Torora Cullen, who is the chief economist. The FAO is a key partner to the Inter-Parliamentary Union in the area of nutrition and food security, and they are the leading global agency to defeat hunger and malnutrition. Transforming food systems is at the center of all of their action. So he'll build on what Ms. Kalibata has said and make his presentation now. Without further ado, Maximo.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here together with Agnes to discuss about the importance of the agri-food system transformation. What I will do, so that we don't use too much of your time, I won't do my PowerPoint. I will share my PowerPoint with you, but I will try to bring the key points behind of what I was trying to present today to complement what Agnes has said. So there are three important areas of my presentation. First, the challenges, which Agnes already Dr. Kalibata already has raised those issues, and then addressing the trade-offs and synergies, which is something that is extremely important, and we are working together in the Food System Summit to try to bring those up. And finally, the entry points for the parliamentarian action. So let me first start with the importance of the challenges. So as Agnes mentioned, before COVID-19, we have 690 million people already suffering from chronic hunger. Up 60 million in the last 5 years. But with COVID-19, this has exacerbated, and it could increase up to 132 more million people coming into the role of chronic hunger. And this is together with a significant increase also in extreme poverty. Basically, we have lost close to a decade, despite of the enormous investment that has been put in place in social programs like cash transfer programs to minimize that. But despite that, increase in extreme poverty has been significant, and even in regions that we were not expecting, that were already doing well, like the case of Latin America and especially South America. 144 million children, 21% under 5 years of age, are stunted, 47 million are wasted, and 38% are overweight. and more than 2 billion people suffer from overweight and obesity. And this in a context where 3 billion people cannot afford the cheapest healthy diet. They don't have access to it. And a healthy diet is 5 times more expensive than a calorie-sufficient diet. And a healthy diet is 60% more expensive than a nutrient-sufficient diet. So this is the picture. This is the situation we are living, and this is why it's so important, the Food System Summit, because it will help us, as Dr. Kalibata mentioned, to be able to create this important change and transformation and movement that will allow us to move forward. In addition to this, let's not forget that 4.5 billion people still depend on food systems for their jobs and livelihoods. But agri-food systems are highly dependent on the natural resources and are affected by climate change, which is another challenge, which is already there, and which have 2 elements. One is of extreme situations, but the second element is of increase of variability, which brings more uncertainty for farmers and producers to make the decisions. And this in a highly degraded and exacerbating already nature environment, which is being pushed to its maximum and is extremely stressed. Not only water, soils, land are going through such a significant pressure. So it's essential to take this into consideration, because we need to find a solution that allows us to produce what is needed to improve the access to healthy diets, but at the same time, to do it minimizing the potential effects over our environment and over our climate. Because as you know, agriculture is an important emitter of greenhouse gas emissions to the food system. Despite of all these challenges, it's also important to bear in mind how the food system contributes to our livelihoods and economy. Agri-food systems are the world's largest economic system measured in terms of employment, livelihoods, and planetary impact. Worldwide, 1 billion people are employed through the agri-food system production, harvesting, services processing, and distribution, and another 3.5 billion can earn their livelihoods through them. Therefore, any solution, and also taking into account that the most of the poor are in rural areas, any solution that we try to bring in the Build Back Better or in the Build Back for the Future Better has to take into account rural areas and has to take into account the agri-food systems and agriculture especially. And so we need that to be a core element of any process we implement. For us, we are trying to bring 4 accelerators that we believe is extremely important: data, real-time data, innovation, and technology. But we also need to bring complements to that to assure that this transformation is inclusive. And those complements are governance, human capital, and institutions. If we don't put that in place in parallel to the other 3 accelerators, we could end in a situation which we will exclude more people, and that's what we want to avoid. This has to be a transformation in an inclusive process. So as an agri-food system lens also help us to consider the trade-offs and the synergies between the food systems and other systems. There are important trade-offs and synergies between our consumption patterns and our health and the environment, which can be better stressed using food system approaches. Examples of important trade-offs are diet-related costs. So health costs related to mortality and diet-related non-communicable diseases show that if the current food consumption patterns continue, diet-related health costs linked to non-communicable diseases are projected to exceed 1.3 trillion per year by 2030. But a transformation to healthy diets could reduce the direct and indirect costs by up to 97% by 2030. So the impacts could be enormous and huge. Social costs related to greenhouse gas emissions estimated to reach more than 1.7 trillion per year by 2030. But it is also estimated that adjustments to how we produce and consume food can reduce costs to society from greenhouse gas emissions by 41% to 74% by 2030. So these hidden costs could be considered a significant underestimation. So there is a huge window of opportunity, and beyond the financial savings and a reduction in these costs will also naturally contribute to ending hunger and in all forms of malnutrition. The complexity of working across sectors, across disciplines, and across institutions can be overwhelming, highlighting the importance of governance to help guide our actions. And the following are a number of practices that we need to improve. We need to foster cooperation, as Dr. Kalibata was mentioned. We need to bring all the players into action to be able to start bringing proposals at the country level, at the national level, dialogues that will allow us to come with the solutions that we need to put in place, which are responding to the needs of the countries. Finally, the recent released Food Systems and Nutrition Handbook for Parliamentarians, number 32, prepared by the Inter-Parliamentarian Union and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, in collaboration with the Scaling Up Nutrition Sun Movement and the World Health Organization, the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, and the African Union Development Agency, New Partnership for Action Development, is a response to requests and needs expressed by parliamentarians. It introduces nutrition and food systems, identifying entry points for parliamentary interventions to improve diet and nutrition through a food systems approach, and recommends actions parliaments and parliamentarians can take in terms of their mandates, legislation, oversight, budget, and representation. Case studies from around the world are used to illustrate legislative achievements on ongoing efforts throughout the food systems aimed at supporting delivery of healthy diets for improved nutrition, and entry points are examined along the food supply chain, food environment, and consumer behavior elements of the food system. Transforming the food system will require a common effort and the collaboration of all, particularly with the parliamentarians. Parliamentarians are change agents in the fight to eradicate hunger and malnutrition, as they are in charge of adopting domestic legislation and approving budget allocations, as well as of ensuring government's allocations and accountability for the effective implementation of commitments, taking into account the context and specific needs of constituents for their people. Parliamentarians are fundamental custodians of political commitments on food security and nutrition, therefore critical partners in achieving food and nutrition security. Parliamentarian efforts are key to placing these issues at the highest level of the policy and legislative agendas. This is why FAO has supported the establishment of several parliamentarian networks in different regions and has supported political dialogues and capacity development activities. FAO works with more than 40 national and regional parliamentarian alliances worldwide, and more than 35 laws have been developed and adopted thanks to this collaboration. For example, we have technically supported established laws on family farming, responsible investments in agriculture, gender empowerment, school feeding programs, front-of-pack nutrition labeling, food loss and waste, among others. And we just approved the Code of Conduct of Reduction of Food Loss and Waste. We are convinced that this kind of sectoral law support to the progressive realization of the right to adequate food for all is essential, as we also believe that parliamentarians hold a strategic position for incorporating the right to adequate food in national constitutions. In this sense, effective parliamentary actions are those that lead the positive changes in food supply chain and environments, behavior of the people they seek to help, and the systematic and the systems that support all of them. We look forward to working together to support the parliamentarians in this role, and we look forward to a successful food system summit so that we can achieve the transformation that is needed. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Maximo, and thank you for building on what Ms. Calabata had said, which is really that there are some choices to be made. We need to get parliamentarians to understand those choices through the handbook and through participating in some of these dialogues that are being set up through the UN. And we need to make sure that they have access to the necessary changes and understanding the changes in legislation and in policy, and in bringing forth as parliamentarians that cross-pollination of a dialogue that will help people make good choices, and governments bring the proper governance to this description or this design of agri-food systems. We have run a little bit behind, and so I am going to, I noticed there are some questions and comments in the chat, which I'll encourage all the panelists to look at. But we are now going to launch out of Maximo's presentation and look at the first session on building sustainability, food systems and climate change. These two sessions, food systems and climate change, and then food systems and malnutrition, will help are two issues that really cut across food systems and enable us to discuss entry points to transform production and consumption patterns as a way to make them more sustainable, healthy, and equitable. And certainly Maximo gave us some really important stats on healthy diets and nutritious diets and the increased costs that are there. In fact, I hope you'll post those numbers. I wrote them down quickly, but and I know you'll share your presentation, but they were really quite stunning, 60% increased cost. So the objectives of this session are to understand the long-term environmental, economic, and social consequences of current unsustainable food systems, and then to discuss those legislative and policy measures to address the impact of climate change on food systems and the impact of food systems on climate change, which I think the Canadian Nathaniel has also put in his in the comment section. This is an interactive session. So after Mr. John Ingram, Food Systems Transformation Program Leader at the Environmental Change Institute at Oxford, makes his presentation of about 8 minutes, we will have an opportunity for a discussion around these issues. Over to you, Mr. Ingram.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me, if I just may share my screen so I can share some slides. What Mr. Terrero has been highlighting with statistics, I hope I can put those in a good context. What I'd like to do, if I may, is just start with a question: what do we actually want from our food systems? The obvious answer is food security, but has been implied there's a whole pile of other things that we as society actually want and expect from our food systems. Obviously, health and environment are up there at the top of the list, but there's a whole list of other things, and you could add your own words to that list as well, I'm sure. So we're actually demanding as society a huge amount from our food system. What do? Well, we have a series of food system activities that we're familiar with, everything from farming and fishing through processing and wholesaling, etc., to consuming, which lead to various aspects of food security. But of course, they also give rise to these other socioeconomic outcomes. Maximo was listing the number of people employed in the food sector and its importance in livelihoods. And of course, they list a number of environmental outcomes as well. And we're here to talk about climate change. So, as also been mentioned, there are trade-offs to be aware of. We want good health, but we also want good environment. How do we do that? The hope is that we can identify synergies and we can exploit those to the betterment of society. We know the current impact of our food system activities on the global environment. We know the soils are degraded. We know that perhaps 20% of aquifers are overexploited. We know that we've got perhaps 60% loss of biodiversity, huge impact on marine resources, and we also have pollution, chemicals, plastic, all of these ills that are byproducts of the way the food system has emerged over the last 50 or 100 years. But perhaps most worrisome at the moment is that this latest paper in Nature Food, just a month or 3 ago, perhaps a third of global anthropogenic emissions are from the food system. Not just the farming and the fishing, but the whole food system in its entirety. And this syndemic, as it's been called, was featured in a major Lancet periodical a couple of years ago. The global syndemic of obesity, undernutrition, and climate change represents the paramount health challenge to humans in the 21st century. Very true. But there are a number of stresses and shocks impacting the food system. We've talked about the effect of the food system on climate. What about the effect of climate on the food system? We have climate change, but we also have extreme weather. Climate change is more of a stress. We know it's there, it's slowly getting bigger, and we're aware of it. Extreme weather can come at any moment, it can be a major shock. But of course, there are other stresses and shocks that also interact, both with the climate and the extreme weather issues. And again, you can see several examples here. And these are all very real. And it's the interaction of the stresses and the shocks that affect the food system, and how do we respond to that? So it really does beg the question of the future. What's coming down the track? And for whom? Are we expecting more food? Many of us assume we will have more food. There's a growing global middle class, which is basically a good thing, but with that comes an extra demand for food. Or will many of us on the planet actually be facing a future with less? And as environmental stress begins to affect the food system more and more, and the population demand increases, how are we going to balance that out? So there are some major challenges to society, very much of a moral nature, as well as of a technical nature. So just to conclude, what I'd like to do is present a picture of where we're going. Let me start going back to the year 2000. The year 2000 is the grey slope, and what it's showing is that along the x-axis we had about 6 billion people on the planet, and on the y-axis is the kilocalorie consumption per person per day. This is not about full nutrition, it's just about calorie consumption. It's indicative, not to scale. And we can see that in that year, there was perhaps 1.5 billion of us well above the 2,500 calories per day. There was about 1 billion of us below, in the hungry zone. We know that today, 2021, we've got about 7.5 billion of us, and that we've got, again, not quite 1 billion people below the hunger line, but we've also got 2.5 billion of us or so well above the excess calorie line. We've had reference to obesity and overweight. The 2,500 is one of the recommended intakes on a daily basis. If we extrapolate to the end of this decade, we will see about another 1 billion people on the planet. We're aware of the increasing middle class, the urbanization, the change in diet towards a more calorie-intense diet. And you'll notice that the sloping lines have begun to kink. And what that's showing is an increase in the overconsumption of calorie, but I also fear an increase in those below the hunger line. As the stress increases, we've already seen the statistic from Maximo, the impact of COVID. As the system itself gets more stressed, I fear that we will see an increase in the people below the hungry line, and I'm certain we're going to see an increase of people above the excess line. So if we just go forward to 2040, when maybe we've got 9.5 billion people on the planet, I fear we will still be seeing 1 billion or so below the hungry line, proportionately less, but still far too many. But my real concern is the slope to the left and the amount of calories we will be consuming on average by the global population as wealth increases, as diets change and aspirations drive dietary change. What is all this going to lead to? The climate change implications and other environmental consequences of meeting this extra demand is absolutely alarming in the extreme. Don't forget, the area under these curves represents the amount of calorie that needs to be harvested. Here we are in 2021, and when we go forward to 2040, it's considerably more. We've already been alerted to the cost of the malnutrition in all its forms, direct, indirect, lost work days, perhaps 11% of global GDP. And we also know of this extraordinary cost to diabetes and the projection through to 2030. The numbers are approximate, but it's a very, very large amount of money, and that's just one disease. So for those who are below the curve, we absolutely have the moral imperative to meet demand. There's no doubt about that, and that issue has not gone away and it's going to intensify. But the much greater challenge, and the one that I would ask parliamentarians to really consider, is how do we manage demand of the left-hand side of the curve? The right-hand side is important. The left-hand side is arguably more important, because if we don't get a handle on the left-hand side, the right-hand side is going to be even harder to manage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ingram. I'll now turn to the members of Parliament, and I'll remind everyone that we're looking for 2 minutes or less for an intervention. I have been told that Thailand would like to intervene on the next session, so I'll hold you there. I will turn to, I believe Sylvia is from, is from Argentina. And I will encourage everyone to focus on these 3 questions. So they're making a question or a comment in response to Dr. Ingram's presentation to talk about the long-term environmental, economic, and social consequences of the current unsustainable food systems, which I think he's laid out rather well. What transformations are needed to address the impact of climate change on food systems and the impact of food systems on climate change. And certainly the Canadian MP has pointed out, certainly diet choices make a difference. And what are the legislative and policy entry points for more sustainable food systems that are climate smart, inclusive, and gender responsive? And of course, Maximo has identified some of those and identified the handbook, which our colleague Miriam has put the link in the chat for. So without further ado, I will turn to the Argentinian. I've lost Sylvia, over to you for, and I'm going to keep track of a 1 to 2 minute intervention, and I'll give you the signal when.
Muchas gracias. Agradezco a la Unión Interparlamentaria por esta oportunidad. Desde Argentina, país productor.
Thank you to the IPU from Argentina, a producer country that produces for over 400 million in the world, but we are 45 million in the world, and most of them are starving. And therefore, the food business is not a voluntary work. In my opinion, we cannot reach a sustainable food system without prioritizing organic food production. In our region, states have faced limitations to restrict massive use of agrotoxics. Corporative interests advance, and money is the main interest. What could the global community do in order to limit the usage of agrotoxics? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn to Senator from Pakistan. 1 to 2 minutes, please. Sir, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay.
You're good. You're good.
Can you
Yep.
can you hear?
Yes,
Can you hear?
please go ahead.
All right.
Yep.
First of all, a word of appreciation for the IPU who organized this this conference. Actually, what we in Pakistan are witnessing is a phenomena of climate change, where the glaciers, which once upon a time used to provide the source of water for irrigation purposes, that has dried up, in fact. And the other things that basically are related to food security are questions of the yield per acre because of the question of waterlogging and salinity in the soil over here, rising populations, lack of innovative scientific technology so that yields could increase, and the quality of food actually for the lower classes, the middle class and the lower class, could in fact become a little better than what is being done now. My question basically to the experts here is that how do they feel that what is the role that Parliament has played so far? Do they feel that parliaments have been able to come up to the expectations of people in relation to fulfilling the expectations of nutrition and the sustainable development goals that the United Nations has been able to lay down? What has been the role of Parliament so far, and what would they suggest that have been the deficiencies, and what would they propose basically that parliaments do so that they would be able to address these goals for sustainable development laid down by the United Nations?
Terrific. Thank you so much. I'll now turn to Ms. Dinica from Romania.
Thank you very much. I'm the chair of the Committee of Economic Affairs of the Senate of Romania, and let me begin by saying that I'm very interested in this debate because it's an important topic on our legislative agenda as well. To give you an example, our parliament is currently legislative draft, which outlaws unfair trading practices in the agricultural and food supply chain and aims at better protecting farmers and other small and medium-sized suppliers. Now, with your permission, I will ask two questions. The first is a general one. Since we all have agreed that the COVID-19 pandemic presents opportunities to build back better, which are, in your opinion, the pandemic-related opportunities that we should seize in order to reduce food waste and achieve a sustainable management of food at both national and international levels? And the second one is more specific and is inspired by the Romanian law on combating food waste, because the law provides fiscal facilities for the economic operators who decide to sell at discount prices or donate the food close to the expiration date. It was initiated in 2016, but it entered into force only 3 years later, and during this period it underwent significant changes. Following consultations with all the parties involved, the compulsory mechanism, including in the initial form of the law, was replaced in the final version with an optional one. The obligations and fines were replaced with fiscal incentives for those operators in the agri-food sector who take measures to reduce food waste. And my question is, which is in your view the best approach? Legal provisions to oblige economic agents to reduce food waste, or voluntary mechanisms and incentives for those who choose to do that? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very specific questions and great examples of legislation that's been passed in another country, which is helpful. I'll now turn to Syria for 1 to 2 minutes maximum, please.
Greetings. It's our pleasure to attend this meeting. Indeed, the effect of the unjust war on the Syrian society from the angle of food security has negative impact on our citizens, especially by the unilateral penalties imposed on Syrian Arab republics. Taking note that since 2011, we had self-sufficiency and food security. Also, we must refer to the misdistribution of food products globally, and this is reflected on the poor societies. And we hope that there would be justice and supervision from the international organization, especially UN. We also must refer that Turkish occupation has cut the water from flowing inside the Syrian lands, and that led to decreasing that agricultural production, which will lead to the decrease of food provision of the Syrian citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm going to now turn to Canada and then Nicaragua. Very quick interventions, please.
Thanks. I mainly just want to follow up on a comment in the thread in the chat that I made in regard to solutions, because obviously we know that, and I really appreciate the presentation just about the increased demand that we will see as people enter the middle class. And if the continued food system that we have holds, then the existing challenges we have in relation to the consumption of animal protein globally, we are going to see exacerbated in a really serious way. So I guess on a solutions basis, how do we address this challenge, not only to our health and to climate, but also in relation to pandemic risk? How do we focus on plant-based foods from a spending or from a legislative angle?
Thank you so much, sir. Nicaragua, please.
Good morning. We, in the name of the President of the National Assembly, we salute you. Thank you for this opportunity. We want to say that Nicaragua emits 0.02% 0.2% of gases. But our national determinations, well, we identified that 69% of those emissions, gas emissions, belong to the agricultural sector. In the National Assembly in Nicaragua, we align ourselves with the national policy of climate change mitigation. And precisely our first premise is a framework of strategic actions for the agricultural sector. We identified as the main strength the fact of already have all the legal framework that regulates this food sovereignty and security. And from then, we have many laws that will impact the different parts of the food system. Among others, we have clearly established regulation that will will guarantee the access and consumption of food. We also have a phytosanitary protection law. We recently passed that. And with that, we regulated not only to guarantee and improve the health of vegetable food, but also it established clearly the principle of sovereignty. Nicaragua can take every measure to protect every phytosanitary aspect. We also want to say the practices we have.
Thank you. I'm now going to turn to Ms. Ramos, please, for 1 minute.
Sí, muchas gracias. ¿Me escuchan?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, I think it was very interesting, especially the John Ingram presentation, especially this last slide. It explains very much our path. In that sense, I need to know your opinion on the recent proposals of the European Union, our biodiversity strategy and our strategy from the farm to the table, improve the organic usage, improving it to 25%, and reducing by 50% of chemicals in our agriculture. We also need to guarantee soil legislation to guarantee the basics, which are the nutrients. Do you think this is the path to follow? And what about the schedule? Your slide is very clear, 2030, 2040, 2050. And another main point to me, we need to talk about food waste. This is dramatic. We have on the other side malnutrition, and a third part of the world food production is food waste at the end of the day. And I think it's very visual when we talk about a food problem. It's not a production problem, but a problem from the food system and a problem of right to access.
Gracias. Can you please tell us which country you're from?
España.
I'm from Spain.
Gracias. Thank you very much. I will now turn to our panelists. We do have Mr. Ingram, but I will also ask if Dr. Ingram, sorry, Maximo and Ms. Calabata would like to come back in for a 2-minute comment on some of the interventions specifically. And I will direct you to Bolivia, put a comment in the chat that you can also look at. Ms. Kalabata, do you have a question, a comment, or a quick intervention?
Thank you, Paddy, and thank you, Your Excellencies, for these questions and comments that you're asking. I will say one thing. Many of the things the ideas you put on the table, we will use to enhance how we are thinking about our work and how we put forward some of the ideas that are being put forward as solutions. Definitely some of the areas you're mentioning here are highlighting challenges. Now, so I really want to commit that we will pay the most attention to some of these questions you put forward. Many of them are quite specific, and I will leave it to the scientists that have presented to address, the experts to address some of these challenges. I just want to say that with the pre-summit coming up, I really would like to encourage all of you to engage and to help us ensure that national pathways that are going to be formed are reflective of some of these challenges that you're talking about, and to actively seek for solutions based on some of the ideas we have out there. The reason I'm saying that, Paddy, is I really need to go. I'm like 15 minutes late for another meeting, but I know that Maximo and the other colleague will take them on. Thank you so much.
Terrific. Well, we really appreciated having you, and we know that you listened to the interventions, and that's terrific. And hopefully many of these parliamentarians will be able to ask their parliament and their ministers what they are presenting to your meeting in July and in September, and they can get engaged and have parliamentary hearings on this topic in their own countries. So thank you and good luck with your work. I'll now turn, thank you. I will now turn to Maximo for up to 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I will be very brief and we'll focus on a few topics. One which I believe is important is the issue of distribution of food globally that was raised by Syria. It's an important topic. If we do a mechanistic approach and we just add up all the food that is being produced, we have enough calories for the people, for the demand that we have in the world. If we even expand to flexitarian diets, we have basically all what we need. So it's not just an issue of increasing productivity and production, it's also an issue of distribution. And we need to think carefully how we can improve access to food across the world. And this is linked, of course, to income and linked to income inequality. And that's where the rural areas play a crucial role. And I think linked to this is the fact that the parliamentarians play a crucial role because they can always question the ministries on why they are not linking and giving the incentive for rural areas to do the things that they need to do and put in place. The second element is the importance of food loss and waste. It was raised by several, and I think it's central. It's a triple win. It will provide more availability of food, especially high-value commodities where the major losses occur. And it will also, just a second, please. Apologies for that. The second is on food loss and waste. And there is where there is a triple win, as I was saying. First, increasing productivity, which will allow us to have more available, especially high-value commodities. Second is improvement in the efficiency of the use of our natural resources. And third is a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, especially on the waste side, where most of the emissions have been already accumulated because of transportation. And the final point is on the labor markets that was mentioned by Bolivia. I think it's a really important problem. One of the issues that we are facing today, and which was very clear on COVID-19, is the fact that most of the developing economies are informal economies. And as a result, they don't have social security, they don't have unemployment insurance, they don't have health insurance. And rural sectors, and especially agriculture, has played a bigger share in this informality. Unless we find ways through legislation, flexible legislation, labor legislation, that will allow us to formalize these economies, it will be extremely difficult to be able to do that and to change and to create a transformation. We need to find labor legislation that will allow us to fill the calendar of the farmers, which have a calendar based on seasonality. And that's where we can play a crucial role to be able to do that. So I think it's central to start thinking on flexible labor legislation to be able to achieve that. And this is also linked to the issue of the middle class. What we are observing in South America because of COVID-19 is that the middle class is shrinking because people that were informal, that had enough income to start to move to middle class because of the stop of the lockdowns of all the economic activity, these people are immediately moving into poverty groups, moving away from middle class. So unless we resolve the problem of informality, we will be facing significant challenges in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now I'll turn to Dr. Ingram.
Good, thank you. Well, there was a bit of a recurring theme with many of the interventions, and I'd like to pick up on this. I think it was Canada who put it very succinctly in the consumption of animal products and how do we therefore focus on plant-based. I'd like to put it in a broader context of really how do we manage demand. It was my closing point of my slides. The demand function of the equation is driven by our personal consumption, but it's also driven overall by the amount of essentially human edible food that we feed to animals, and also the amount of human edible food we put into biofuels. Arguably 20% of maize is put into biofuel, and 30% of all cereal crops are fed into animals. So hand in hand with a reduction in animal product consumption would go a concomitant reduction in the demand for those cereals, and hence it could shift more towards the human diet. But overall, we need to ramp down demand, particularly as we go forward. Very interesting what Maximo was saying about the shrinking middle class. I can appreciate the horrors that people are experiencing, but I also hope that that will reverse and the middle class will continue to again expand. I think that the message to parliamentarians is really to appreciate the size of the challenge at societal level, and to be bold, if I may put it like that, to actually discuss with your societies the notion of the future and think long term. I know there's often a desire to think relatively short term in political process, but we are talking about a long term challenge. And we really need to have legislation supported by education, supported by appreciation that we are really trying to shift our society towards a future where we consume the sufficient amount of food, as in the FAO food security definition. And the word sufficient not only means not too little, but it also means not too much. And I would just close by saying that another form of food waste, which is uncomfortable to talk about, is unnecessary overconsumption.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Ingram. I was reminded of something someone gave me when I was first elected, which was a sign that said, "Have courage." And so you've issued a challenge to all the members of Parliament here to get uncomfortable discussions going and to bring people together to make change and bring populations along with them as thought leaders and as activists, pushing governments to do better and creating that space for people to bring their issues to the table and to address the inequalities. Your presentation will be shared with everybody following this meeting, whether through our website or elsewhere. And I do encourage everyone also to look back into the chat. I know Bolivia has posted several things in English and in Spanish. And we'll now turn the next part of the meeting over for moderation to Ms. Gerda Verberg, who is with the Sun Movement. And she does know that there are 3 hands raised, Thailand being the first one, and then Mr. Aita and Ms. Marquez. I do encourage everyone who is interested in making an intervention to please put your country name first and then your name, so it's easier for us to know where you are coming from and for all the listeners to know. And it's very easy to do to rename yourself. It's just in that tile where your picture is, there's 3 dots. If you drag your cursor there, and one of them will, if you tap on there, you'll see a rename myself, and you can do that, or you could send me a chat directly and I'll fix it for you. And I will now turn over to Ms. Verberg. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patty, and thank you for so eloquently leading this first part of the meeting. I have been a politician myself, so I know how eager people are and committed people are to speak up and speak out. So I can only repeat your encouragement. Members of Parliament, I'd like to give the floor to as many as possible of you, because we need to hear from you, and you need to be able to encourage each other or to ask questions. But please be as brief and concise as possible. And now to start the issue under item 2, we will focus on the other topic here, which is focusing on health and nutrition, of course, the people's part, but it's all interconnected. And we will start with Mrs. Sanya Nishtar. She is a senator. She's a special assistant to the Prime Minister of Pakistan. She is the chair of ASA's program on social protection and poverty alleviation. And she knows a lot about nutrition because she also has been the chair of the obesity organization worldwide. And as we know, all forms of malnutrition are interlinked. But first, I'm happy to give the floor to Sanya Nishtar. Sanya, are you there?
Yes, Gerda, I am, and good day to everybody.
So you have the floor for the next 5, 6, 7 minutes, and you can do it. I know it very well. Over to you, Sanya.
Thank you very much, Gerda, and good day to all the friends and colleagues who I can see on the screen. I also want to thank you for having this dialogue on a very important subject of food systems and how central they are to the equation of health, sustainability, and equity. And I just want to add 2 other things to the list: environmental protection and human security, because food systems are absolutely vital to the human security equation as well. We all know that we are living in a world where we're struggling with the triple burden of malnutrition, undernutrition, inadequacy of vitamins and minerals, overweight and obesity. And in a lot of homes and settings and communities, we see all these things in one household, which is most disturbing. Globally in 2020, 149 million children under 5 were estimated to be stunted, 45 million were estimated to be wasted, and 38.9 million were overweight and obese. Around 45% of deaths among children under 5 years of age are linked to undernutrition, which is astounding. These mostly occur in low and middle income countries. And at the same time, in these same countries, the rate of childhood obesity, overweight and obesity are rising. So as somebody responsible for social protection today in my country at the cabinet level, and with my past history of having worked in non-communicable diseases and obesity, I continue to be astounded by the prevalence of obesity and stunting and wasting in same homes and same underprivileged homes. It's a global phenomenon. It's not just confined to my country. Now, we all know that the developmental, economic, social, and medical impacts of the global burden of malnutrition are very serious. They're lasting, not only for individuals and their families, but also for communities and countries. For a very long time, we've known that malnutrition leads to higher healthcare costs and lost productivity. And therefore, our government is very conscious that investments in nutrition are actually an economic investment. As a government, we are also conscious of the fact that a food system approach to addressing malnutrition requires comprehensive programs and coherent public policies that address both the supply and the demand sides of the food, as well as the food environment where consumers engage with the food system. So recognizing this area as a priority, our government has constituted a multi-stakeholder coordination committee with 7 of us cabinet ministers as members, and with the Prime Minister chairing it personally. That committee meets on a periodic basis and decides on how intersectoral collaboration will take effect and how to reduce duplications and overlaps, which, as you know, are quite inherent to this kind of work. Our Prime Minister, in his opening speech, held up the CT scan of a child who was stunted comparing it with a CT scan of a child who had a normal brain to demonstrate the detrimental impact of stunting on human capital development in an environment, where human capital is a very salient consideration if countries have to progress in the world of tomorrow. So this is the kind of priority that we are trying to accord to nutrition. Of course, implementation is a challenge. But we also recognize that women play a very important role across the food system spectrum, starting from agriculture and all the way down to consumption. So we're trying to address the patriarchal system in food distribution at various different levels. To give you just a snapshot of the kind of attention we are according to women across the spectrum, as Gerda just said, I run a program called ESAS. ESAS is the Urdu word. Urdu is our local language, and it's the local language word meaning compassion. It's a program with over 270 policies, programs and initiatives, all linked by theory of change, targeting 14 disadvantaged groups. And these programs are organized in 4 technical pillars: social protection, human capital development, jobs, livelihoods, and poor governance. And we have a cardinal rule in this program, which is called the 50% plus, which essentially means that 50% of all benefits will accrue to women in the household. So about 2 years ago, we launched a new conditional health and nutrition conditional cash transfer program. And as part of that, for the first time, arguably the first time, the consumption of specialized nutrition food is being combined with cash transfers. And what we're focusing on is a higher cash transfer for girls compared with boys, just to signal the importance of girls. One of the other programs called the Esas Amdan program, which means the income program, involves giving assets, livelihood assets to communities. It is 60% allocated for women. Livestock is a very important component of that. And agriculture assets are a very important component of that. And this program is predicated on the understanding that agriculture assets training and support to increase agriculture productivity and output and access to markets to sell nutritious foods will actually benefit nutrition outcomes, will benefit both livelihood outcomes as well as nutrition outcomes. I also want to mention when I'm talking about this program that when COVID-19 had struck initially and when our country went into lockdowns, we ran a very large program of cash transfers reaching out to 15 million families. And subsequent to the deployment of that program, we conducted a nationally representative survey, and we found out that 95% of the consumption of that cash transfer was for food and for food rations, which really helps to drive drive the nail home about the importance of the integration of social protection with food security and food systems outcomes. But I can also tell you from my experience working in the government that food systems are extremely complex, and there's an interplay of so many factors. For instance, wheat has a very large input. We are a wheat consuming nation. The wheat supply chain has a very huge interplay in our economy. And there are so many factors that influence the price of wheat, which is the staple diet, ranging from the support price to the prices of imports, to the availability of water, to the local dynamics, to the prices in the international market, to organized activity of cartels who try to maneuver supply chains to price gouge. it's extremely complex for governments to manage that. And just this morning in the Senate subcommittee on food security, we were talking about the importance of data, the importance of data from the ground, and how do you gather data in a very large country, which is a federal polity where agriculture is a devolved subject, and where the federal government is only responsible for the collation of data, not the collection of data, and what kind of an impact it has on the ultimate statistics that that you use to gauge stocks and availability, and the statistics that you will have to import stocks to hedge yourself against shocks.
Sonia, can you try to
yes.
conclude, please?
Yes, so I'm just concluding. So I'm just saying that these are extremely complex decisions. And while I conclude, I just want to mention that our government is also on a drive towards digitization, and one of the digitization endpoints hugely cross-cut with the food supply chain. So we believe that if our merchants are digitized and if there are points of sales machines at every merchant, then the government will be able to roll out a program to implement targeted subsidies, targeted commodity subsidies, and give deserving individuals, the deserving individuals will be able to get staple food items on a lower price subsidized by the government. So I've touched on a few points in a very complex ecosystem, but just to let you know that there are many levers at the disposal of a government when it comes to food systems, and it requires very complex understanding of the dynamic, complex decision making with a huge intersectoral interplay. But the starting point for all that is good data and digitization. I genuinely believe that if we have access to good data and if we have digitized supply chains, then it would be extremely helpful for us to bring in a transformation with the endpoints in mind of the kind that are reflected in your title and which actually be the public policy goals. Thank you, Gerda, and over back to you.
Thank you very much, Sonia, for your inspiring contribution. It's not an easy chart. That is what you are making clear. You have told how the approach of Pakistan is. 7 ministers involved, chaired by the Prime Minister, which is showing the government. Very complex, but you need to take it from where you are and build on the situation that is in your country. You also have made clear the connection between, for instance, poverty, production, inequity or inequality, and the need to focus on families and communities. Also with combined actions, not only focus on one action, but give incentives that are speaking to people and families, and that can support implementation and improvement. I now open the floor, and I have already quite a list of people who want to speak up, and that is good, that is great, because that is what we need. Let us start with Thailand. And Thailand, I really gonna encourage you to try to make it 1 minute instead of 2 minutes, because I have already 6 people on my list, and I want to also get an answer from 1 or 2 of the panelists. Thailand, over to you.
Greetings from Thailand. I'm Professor Dr. Kraisit Thantisrin, a senator. I'm very pleased to join this meeting. The theme of this meeting is quite relevant. And I would like to emphasize one very important goal of transforming food system is to ensure healthy diet for all, particularly the poor and vulnerable group of population. Healthy diet means adequacy of a great variety of safe, nutritious food to fulfill dietary need for all. And COVID-19 pandemic has impacted on food system, livelihood, worsening food security and malnutrition, as well as health worldwide, particularly low and middle income developing country. So we have to focus working in those countries. Without transforming food system, several SDG will not be able to achieve, particularly SDG 1, 2, 3, and 10, and also 13, 14, 15. So we have to start with SDG 17, partnership for SDG, which is very crucial. It requires multi-stakeholder approach, including Parliament, and also it requires multi-strategic approach, and also multi-level approach at global, national, and also local community with maximum people participation, aiming at achieving elimination of hunger, malnutrition, and good health, and also eliminate inequity. In this regard, the Parliament and IPU have a remarkable role to play by commitment and work through enacting favorable laws, fiscal budget allocation, and oversight of policy, strategy, and action for transforming food system for health equity, sustainability as an entry point leading to achieving other SDG. Thailand is quite willing to share and learn to member countries.
I've let you go because you were making a commitment, but we really need to move on. So
yes, okay. Thailand is willing to work with other member countries to share and learn experiences.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Put the rest in the chat box, because I like to have people who are making commitments, because that is what we need to have from government representatives. Thank you so much. Now we go to Mr. Ubaldo Aita from Uruguay. Sir, you have the floor.
Buenos días.
Hello. It's wonderful to be involved here in Uruguay. So greetings, congratulations to the IPU for setting up this remote meeting. This final subject, we have little time. Parliamentarians have a real challenge. We have to make progress in legislation, essentially on accessibility and affordability of food, especially for the most vulnerable in our societies. In this respect, I think that setting up funds to generate resources can help. We can then generate public policy for economic access. I repeat, in Uruguay, physical access is not hard, but economic access is harder. That's vital. So in this respect, we need legislation to set up funds so that states have resources, so the most vulnerable sectors of society, I repeat, can have access to food. In relation to this, there's another challenge. Writing legislation on healthy areas for consumption of food. We need labeling, advertising. This is part of the challenge that we face as parliamentarians. We need to make progress in this respect. We've been making progress in my country, certainly, but we need to do more. We need to keep working on legislation. At the same time, production and climate change. We need to increase subsidies for transition to forms of production that are more agroecological In this way, we can promote family farming. This is a social culture that provides a basis for this possible transition. It's difficult for us. We're losing food producers, family food producers. We need public policy, fiscal policy.
Mr. Aita, can you close? Can you come to a conclusion?
So in this respect, the other question is dealing with territory and protecting zones for agricultural production. Thank you so much. Thank you for allowing me to participate.
Thank you very much. And concrete commitments and concrete questions are prioritized. I very much appreciate it. Thank you so much. Now we go to Mexico, Madam Mariano, Mexico, Madam Marta Marquez.
Gracias.
Madam, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Es un honor.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be participating. I'd like to call everyone's attention, everyone in the UN. So thanks for this summit. In Mexico, two things are happening. We're going back in two ways. Firstly, in terms of food. Labeling's been imposed. People are playing around with this. You cannot see on the food serious labeling showing how many calories there are in each type of food, how much saturated fat, how much sugar, and so on. That's the first step back. Secondly, dismantling of the health system. In Mexico, more than 40 billion pesos have been taken out of the health system. This has had serious effects in conjunction with the pandemic. So I'd like to draw people's attention to this. A concrete question. How are current food systems pushing inequality, including gender inequality, food inequality, and health inequality? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, madam. So to the point, spot on, with clear questions. And we hope to come to the panelists with these concrete questions. Now we go to Ecuador, to Mariano Curicame. I think, yes, you have the floor.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. Thanks for this introduction. I'm representing the National Assembly because the president of the Assembly is not here right now. So I'm from indigenous area of Ecuador. I'd like to make a contribution to this dialogue. Thank you very much. Agriculture can help reduce poverty. 80% of the poor in the world live in rural areas. Malnutrition is a huge challenge in terms of development around the world. People who get less attention then incur large costs. This mostly affects the poor, women, young people, girls. We can agree with what our colleagues from Uruguay and Mexico said. Sometimes governments do not pay attention to the poorest. For example, talk about labels. Often here, a different product is used instead of milk. Whey instead of milk. Because you have small farmers living from that product. So 1 in 4 under 5s in my country suffer from chronic malnutrition. It's a serious issue in rural areas in particular. That's where the bulk of the indigenous population is to be found. I'm proud to represent these people. As a member of the Assembly, I have a duty to legislate in favor of women, children, boys and girls, the poorest people, which I'm sure that all my colleagues in the Assembly would agree. It's a big responsibility. We must create and reform laws for the present and future of my country. There's a specialist committee on food sovereignty and farming. I'm proud to represent this committee along with 9 others. We are responsible for pushing forward with legislative initiatives.
Can you come to conclusion, please?
Sí, muchas gracias. Entonces,
yes, thank you. So, through the National Assembly, legislative bodies, and national government, we will do all that is necessary to help the poorest. Thank you. God bless you.
Very good. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate those members of parliament, those parliaments who are really making a commitment. We will stand for and make it happen. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. Now we go to Mexico, the Senator Rogelio Israel. Sir, you have the floor for 1 minute, and then I go to Nicaragua. Then I don't see more hands raised, but we need to also come to a decent conclusion of this exciting event. Sir, you have the floor.
Gracias. In Mexico,
in Mexico, our constitution says it is a human right to have access to nutritious food in sufficient quantity and of sufficient quality. Of course, we are working on this. It's still a job that needs to be finished. It's a responsibility for everyone who works for the state. A specific question: what are the key questions that you think are necessary to reduce food insecurity that is closely linked to overweight and obesity in countries with high levels of inequality, such as many Latin American countries, particularly during COVID? Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate very much how sharp and to the point you are. I will give you an answer straight after I have given the floor to the Honorable Member of Parliament, Florence Levy from Nicaragua. Madam, you are the final speaker today. You have the floor.
In Nicaragua,
in the National Assembly, in close coordination with the executive, we consider all laws that are part of a single plan of struggle against poverty. It's always relevant for us to stay in touch with families, of course, so we can keep in touch with reality. In National Assembly, we've set up an information system regarding policy, institutional policy, so that in all our standing committees, we can constantly review bills. What contribution are they making directly to food security and sovereignty? We're bearing in mind the Sustainable Development Goals. We also ensure that we incorporate all the relevant variables relating to the environment and climate change. Also, bearing in mind gender practice and intercultural issues. We think it's very important for food systems to be sensitive to racial diversity. We need to take into account food consumption, including Afro-descendants and indigenous people who are often lagging behind. We are not just thinking about being able to eat, but being able to eat well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This is spot on, to the point. I really like this conversation, and it's by far too short. But let me go back to Sanya Nishtar. and ask Sanja one question. Sanja, how to address all the inequalities that were mentioned by the representative of Mexico? Health, nutrition, healthy food, income. Sanja, over to you. Sanja, are you still there? If this is not the case, then let me come to a conclusion here. But before I go to concluding remarks, which I will share with Paddy, because after me, Paddy will speak, but Paddy, we need to cut down our our concluding remarks a little bit because of the time. But the IPU, your Inter-Parliamentarian Union, is extremely active. And there is an answer to many of your questions because the IPU, together with FAO and also the Sun Movement, Scaling Up Nutrition Movement, and other organizations, have worked on a booklet that is called Food Systems and Nutrition Handbook for Parliamentarians. And in this handbook on food systems and nutrition, you can find a lot of information on where to start and how to do it. Now, so this is to the Senator of Mexico. It is also addressing the inequalities, because it's not for nothing that the IPU has put equity in the name of this seminar and this meeting. It is about health, nutrition, equity and sustainability. And as many of the members of parliament have reflected, there is a lot of inequality that needs to be addressed. And I like the contribution of Ecuador, Nicaragua, but also Thailand, the representative of Thailand, making concrete commitments to work on it. But actually, I've heard it in all your commitments. So let me take 2 minutes to give my summary of this meeting from my part. First of all, and I think you will get the slides, the request from our special envoy, Agnes Kalibata. Please participate. This is a whole of parliament issue. It's not only health, it's not only agriculture, it's not only poverty alleviation or education or water and sanitation, it's a whole of parliament approach. Secondly, be invited to participate in your food systems dialogues at country level. As we speak, 133 are ongoing or have been organized already, and quite sure there will be a follow-up. And representatives of the people, of the communities, need to be there. So please join and bring in what you have to bring in. Third point is encourage the government to make concrete commitments on improving the food system focused on people's health and well-being, poverty alleviation, but also on the climate and the biodiversity. And then voice which people voice how people are affected by the failures of the food systems and what should be done. And for that reason, I very much like the commitments that you are already making. And then leverage your power on legislation, budgeting, and oversight. Don't forget how much power you have and why you were elected by the people to represent them and their interests and their families. And then effective action on food systems can save health costs and build resilience, which is also important when there is a pandemic like COVID. And we have heard today also that building resilience and prosperity for people is also important. I've heard the question, should we do this? Do we need to incentivize or do we need to have taxes? My advice as a previous member of parliament, but also as a previous minister in government, use both. Incentives for the coalition of the willing, people who are doing well, and sanctions for the people who are not wanting to do a lot. And my final recommendation is combine actions. Right now, there is a lot of action on vaccination. Combine it with other hands out. For instance, like Sanja Nistar said, products that can support families, women to produce food, nutrition services. Make smart connections so that you can serve communities. My final conclusion here is make sure that the solutions you come forward with and the legislation you agree upon and put in practice, make sure that they can be owned by people, because people and families don't like to be dependent. They want to be able to develop their own future and the future of their children and earn a decent income. And with this, Paddy, I'm happy to hand over to you for your concluding remarks.
Thanks so much, Gerda. And I also want to direct everyone's attention to the chat where Diana Carter has posted some information that's really quite stunning when you think about it. Here we are in this world that's getting more inequitable, and we have so many people suffering on the one hand from obesity and on the other hand from a lack of a healthy diet that has real consequences, not just for those individuals, but for entire economies. So as parliamentarians, as Gerda has said, you have power on legislation, on oversight, on budget, and on representation. You have the ability to convene a meeting in your constituency, to ask questions in your house, to demand answers from your ministers and prime ministers and presidents. And you can use that power and you can develop some profile nationally and in your community to help people understand these facts, but also to listen to them about what can be good solutions that are appropriate for your community and your country. So let's bring the international to the national and the local, and let's get the local up to the national and international. And hopefully through the handbook and through engagement on this topic and listening to your colleagues with great ideas for what they've done, we've sparked some interest and had some good debate, and you will carry this forward both into the July meeting and into the September summit. And we'll have some real action and get somewhere by 2030 and hopefully change that graph that Dr. Ingram has presented to us to be something that's much more equitable, much more sustainable, and lead to better outcomes for everybody. Thank you very much for participating in this session and for your ongoing interest and work with the IPU and on these issues and on behalf of we the people, your constituents. Have a great day, everybody, and thank you again so much to my colleagues for organizing this and to the panelists for coming to the session. There is a quick evaluation. I forgot about this. We want you to quickly do a poll. We need to make sure we're delivering on target. So please just tap in on that poll and give us your ideas about whether you're satisfied, whether this was useful. We can take it. We've been in politics, Gerda.
And thank you very much for having Paddy and me as your moderators, because we had to be tough, but you allowed us to make the best out of it.
That's right. So thank you all very much. Take care and go forth and make a difference. Have courage. Gracias.